Scholarships are an important part of what we do as an organization. Every year, we give three $2,000 scholarships to graduate journalism schools from New York City schools, from NYU, Columbia, and CUNY. And these scholarships are for students who are committed to covering local news. We support local news because it is so vital to our country and our democracy, and it's an endangered species of journalism. So it's an honor to present these to our winners. From NYU, our winner is Isis O'Flynn Schaffhoff.
Hello, everybody. My name is Isis O'Flynn Shahoff. Thank you, obviously, Carol and everybody here for having me. This is very, very amazing to be winning this award. I started being a journalist only a year and a half ago. My first piece that I published was in the Village View newspaper about a local Democratic group. I did not think I would get that piece published. And then ever since I did, I realized that local reporting is the beat that I would probably choose for a long time. I love talking to people. I love, making sure that local stories are told and heard, and that the people of my community, I'm born and raised in New York City, that they don't go unheard of. So just thank you so much. This is an amazing opportunity. Thank you.
From CUNY, our winner is Bella Week.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, I really appreciate this. I started also journalism just less than a year ago. And before that, I spent a long time doing community organizing. And there are, of course, very meaningful differences between the two, but there are similarities as well that I really value. For instance, focusing on things that really matter to people locally, holding powerful people accountable to communities, and yeah, doing work that can also have an impact. So I've loved doing that through journalism now, and it's been so fun learning like from my professors and from other students who are doing work that I admire. Yeah, I'm really excited to keep reporting and keep learning, and yeah, I really appreciate it. It's very meaningful to be here and to get this award. So thank you very much.
Our winner from Columbia couldn't be here today. I think she's graduating. But it's Mia Reiko Anzalone, and she said she's going back to her native Hawaii to report on local communities. We give another scholarship every year, the Dennis Duggan Award. It's another $2,000 scholarship. And this award is named for Dennis Duggan, who was a much beloved Newsday columnist for decades. And he was also a Silurian president. The winner of the Duggan Award is Carol Chen from CUNY.
Thank you so much, Carol. Another Carol. I'm gonna give a little bit of a story, so sorry if this is a little longer, but I promise it's interesting and there's payoff in the end. So when I first got a notification on X last October that a residential building in South Bronx collapsed, I jumped onto the subway. I had no idea what to do or if this was going to be published at all, as our school paper was currently on hiatus at the time. But I just knew that I had to get there. When I arrived, running and gasping for air, I saw every major news outlet there. It was a sea of reporters and firefighters and officials. The areas around the building, NYCHA's Mitchell houses, was cordoned off, and residents weren't allowed to go in or out. My mind was racing frantically as I caught my breath. I was thinking, what am I going to report here that the New York Times isn't already going to report? And how was I even going to get people to talk to me when I know the story wasn't necessarily going to be published? But I stuck around and I bided my time and waited for my chance. As the afternoon approached, the crowd of the media swarm started to dissipate, and I learned that all the residents were being brought over to a community center next to the building that collapsed. I found my way into the center, maybe snuck in, and I interviewed many residents about what had happened to them and their families. I also witnessed a meeting that NYCHA was holding for the tenants and got to learn firsthand the accounts of the collapse that day. I wrote up the story that day and I pushed our paper to publish. But more importantly, I went on to write follow-up stories based on the sources and the relationships that I cultivated there that day. And I learned through that the comparative advantage we have as local journalists are not the name or the size of our papers. Our comparative advantage lies in our willingness to stick around, to be there, to talk to people, to build relationships, and to be unrelenting in our pursuit of the story from the ground up. And these are the journalist values that I've learned in recent days that Dennis Dungan also embodied, along with all of his fellow Silurians here today. I plan to honor his legacy by pursuing more local stories like these that otherwise wouldn't be told. Thank you so much for this opportunity. Thank you, Carol. Thank you, all of you, for being here.
Now, what can I tell you about James T. Madore? His middle initial is not Tiberius, that's for Star Trek. Well, first off, most of his Newsday we call him JT. I can tell you he's a graduate of Washington University and the Columbia Graduate School of Journalism. Check. Don't be shy. I can tell you that his early days in Buffalo come in really, really handy when he wants to interview the governor, who's also from that area. Check. He has worked as a bureau chief in Albany for Newsday, covered local government, Suffolk County, as I recall. He's worked as a media writer covering Newsday, as I recall, during a scandal, as I recall. And he's held down the business desk at Newsday for decades. Check. JT is a man of faith and a man of integrity. And you'll notice I don't check those off because these are attributes that are to him. And I don't know how many of you know this, but JT had a challenging time learning how to read. He didn't learn the way the rest of us did. It took him a while, but he did learn. And I personally think that the challenges of those early years gifted JT with empathy. And I think it also gifted him with his drive for perfection that I know makes people at Newsday crazy sometimes. These two attributes, I think, are what bring us here today to celebrate JT with this very special award. But I also believe that his overarching gift is actually pretty simple. JT is a teacher. His never-ending drive for perfection, his commitment to street reporting serves as a model even for old folks like me. He is also at times as much of as an inspiration as irritation to the people he gets out of the office and into the streets to see. I've often met people who have met JT and they say, whoa, I never met a reporter like him. He listened to me, he heard me, he helped me. At a time when reporters are seen as an enemy, JT is out in these streets every day teaching people that we can be trusted, that we can help. And there's no ignoring the teaching that JT also does with high school kids, with college students interested in becoming reporters. He's helped launch many a career and has helped generations of reporters find, keep, and get better at their work. And he's done this through his leadership at Cebu and in his many speaking engagements, because he took all of mine when I was out for a while. It is my honor and privilege to introduce my colleague, my friend, James Madore. JT, come get him, boy.
Good afternoon. Joy, thank you for that very generous introduction and for your friendship. I'd also like to recognize the other Newsday folks who are here in attendance. Our owner, Pat Dolan, and his lovely wife, Louise. Our publisher, Debbie Krennick. Our editor, Rochelle Bishop-Sleets. Our managing editor, Baird Hegelson. And our former business editor, Margaret Corvini. Thank you to each of you for taking time out of your busy schedule to be here to support me. Newsday is incredibly fortunate in its ownership. At a time when many media organizations are struggling to fulfill their mission, Pat Dolan provides the resources that make it possible for Newsday to cover every aspect of life on Long Island. Thank you, Pat, for being an inspiration. For being an inspiration to me and to every Newsday journalist. Thank you. I'd also like to congratulate my fellow honoree, Chuck Scarborough, on his 50 years of extraordinary service to the metropolitan area. Chuck, you are a trusted voice in good times and in bad times. Thank you. In December, I will mark my 30th anniversary as a Newsday employee. I will always be grateful to Silurians President Eileen Jacobson and her husband, Richard Gallant, for showing me the way at Newsday. Eileen and I worked together for several years covering the media in New York City. And I wouldn't be at Newsday if it wasn't for Richard Gallant, who hired me away from the Buffalo News in 1996. When Eileen told me that I had been selected to receive the Peter Keyes Award, I was dumbfounded. Thank you, Silurian Press Club, for this great honor. In preparing my remarks, I reached out to former Silurian President Mike Candell of CNN to find out more about Peter. Mike and I became friends through our involvement in the Society for Advancing Business Editing and Writing, better known as SABU. Mike, thank you for being here and for bringing business news to television. One of the many individuals that Mike mentored at CNN is Caleb Silver, the editor-in-chief of Investopedia and a former SABU president. Caleb, thank you for being here today. I wish I had met Peter Keyes because I share his commitment to shoe leather reporting, accuracy, and fairness. I also believe, as Peter did, that each of us has a duty to help the next generation of journalists. Like many business reporters, I came to the beat by accident and stayed because I found it both challenging and rewarding. Covering business news is about more than the numbers. It's about people. It's about people who work in corner offices, on factory floors, and in home offices. It's about dreams of new products and services, expanded operations, and sales opportunities outside the United States. Over the years, I've reported on the rise of online shopping, the economic fallout from the 9/11 terrorist attacks, Martha Stewart's questionable stock trades, and a financial planner who defrauded 400 senior citizens on Long Island out of more than $160 million in retirement savings. But the pandemic reminded me that every story matters and that readers make life-changing decisions based on the information that I am providing. Thousands of non-essential businesses were forced to shut down for months in 2020 and in 2021 as governments tried to slow the coronavirus's spread. Employees were laid off, and entrepreneurs faced the real possibility that their dream of a thriving company would be extinguished. During that frightening time, Newsday and the Long Island Association Business Group launched a webinar series to help small business owners. Each week, hundreds tuned in as representatives of the U.S. Small Business Administration, New York State government, along with lawyers, accountants, and college professors, shared their expertise. I moderated those discussions with the goal of getting as many audience questions answered as possible in 30 minutes. I also wrote nearly every day about pandemic business relief programs, such as the federal Paycheck Protection Program loans. Desperate entrepreneurs on Long Island and around the country called or sent email messages asking for help. I tried to respond to each one of them, often suggesting sources of reliable information that would not charge a fee. More than 65,000 of Long Island's 300,000 businesses were approved for Paycheck Protection Program loans. As a result, many, but not all, survived the worst economic downturn since the Great Depression. For me, journalism is about community. When I'm on assignment, I often recall one of my late mother's favorite sayings. She would say, "God did not put us on this earth to take, but to give." On behalf of Mom, my late father, and Newsday, thank you for this great honor.
In recognition of an extraordinary 50 years, 8 months, and 17 days as the lead anchor at WNBC News, a record unmatched in New York broadcast history, during which he earned 36 Emmy Awards, an Edward R. Murrow Award, a DuPont Columbia Award, and the enduring trust of generations of New Yorkers. Chuck Scarborough's career stands as a testament to excellence, integrity, and the highest traditions of broadcast journalism.
I'm not sure John D. Rockefeller nor his grandson Nelson would agree, but at least one writer has called Chuck Scarborough the cornerstone of 30 Rock. He's been described as the gold standard, as iconic, as legendary, and as a broadcast newsman of velvet voice and dashing good looks. We're here to honor Chuck Scarborough's gifted anchoring of the news on the flagship station of the NBC television network for more than half a century, as you've already heard. The words awesome and astounding leap to mind. An individual managing that much time at the very pinnacle of any business or profession would justly be labeled extraordinary, but 5 decades of graceful success in what's seen as the Shark Tank of New York City TV news, that's beyond epic. And by the way, my fellow Silurians, WNBC TV was not his first rodeo. Here, please allow me to telescope it a bit. He was born in Pittsburgh, and after graduating the University of Southern Mississippi with highest honors and serving 4 years in the Air Force as a pilot, I think.
No,
No?
intercontinental ballistic missiles. That's a different story.
Didn't know about that part. I guess he couldn't talk about it. Anyway, he worked at TV stations in Biloxi, Laurel, Atlanta, and Boston before coming to WNBC New York. Now, as you've heard, he's won numerous awards, but we at the Silurians held off. We wanted to be sure. Chuck, congratulations on an extraordinary career and for your latest honor here at the Silurians. You know, years ago, I did a radio interview with Walter Cronkite, who said his first memory of broadcasting news was done without a microphone. As a little guy in Missouri, Uncle Walter remembered waving a newspaper and shouting to anyone on the street who would listen that President Harding had died. I understand your first impulse to inform the public came in a movie theater.
Yes, it did. This is a story my mother tells me. When I was 2 years old, it was 1945. My father was a combat pilot flying B-17s in the European theater at the time. And my mother took me to the movies. And back then, they had the movie tone newsreels. That's where people got their visual news from overseas. And on the screen in the crowded theater was a squadron of B-17s flying a bombing mission. And I stood up and in a high, squeaky little voice said, "My daddy flies B-teens. My daddy flies B-teens." And the entire theater broke out in sobs. So I think that early ability to make vast numbers of total strangers cry was clearly an indication I was headed for a career in television news.
So let's talk about how you went from the Air Force into journalism. And we talked about it a little bit in your first foray into print. Wait a minute, print?
Yep.
Okay, An Anatomy of an Air Crash, 1973. How did that come about?
Well, that was, by then, I had already begun my television career, and I was in Boston, which was my last stop before New York. And I had become the aviation reporter du jour. There was a crash at Logan Airport, Delta 723, as I recall. had hit the seawall and on an attempted landing. We didn't know what it was. I was at home at the time, and I lived in an apartment right across the harbor. I lived in Long Wharf in Boston, if any of you are familiar with Boston, but I was in one of the early urban pioneers in Long Wharf, and there was a converted warehouse. But I was right across the water, very close to Logan Airport. And the assignment desk called me and said, there's something going on at Logan. There was very thick fog. I could see nothing out of the windows of the apartment. I'm going to send a stringer over there, a guy named Richie Suskin, and would you guys go over and check it out? So Richie came. I had at the time, I had a car that looked like a plane wrap police car. I had its Mercury. It was dark green Mercury. So we put the gear in my car and headed for the Callahan Tunnel. Realized it was closed because that was part of the emergency drill, which was the first sign something bad had happened at the airport. But a police car went flying by, lights and sirens. So I pulled in behind him and just tailgated him. And we got out to the airport. Instead of going to the main terminal, the police car went onto the access road that is around the perimeter of the airport, and I tailgated him. He pulled up at the airport fire station, and it was foggy. I couldn't quite see, but I could tell all the doors were open on the airport fire station, which was the second big clue that something bad had happened. So I got out of the car, and it was dead quiet. The airspace had been closed. I spotted somebody from the Port Authority. Walked over to him and said, what happened? He said, well, we've got a plane down on 4 right, and as you can see, we've got a lot of casualties. And I turned around, and there were 30 bodies that had just been extracted from the wreckage lined up on the floor of the airport fire station. They'd been alive an hour earlier. And so we hitched a ride on an ambulance. And this was a surreal scene, if you can imagine this. The fog was white. When we got out to the actual crash site on 4 right, the ground was covered with white foam, and there were nurses in white uniforms standing around doing nothing because there was only one survivor who would die several months later. And he was in the wreckage with his arm, one arm, and his head looked fine. The rest of him was charred black because, as he would later tell rescuers, the woman next to him had managed to push his head and arm out of an exit that he was sitting next to before the fuselage flashed with fire. Leopold Chouinard was his name. He was an Air Force sergeant, home to propose to his girlfriend. So I decided at this point, we were using 16 millimeter color reversal film. We didn't have videotape yet. And I decided that I would stay at the airport. I'd do the basic story on the crash, and on film, I would record my intros, film my intros to all of my reporters who were doing the various sidebar stories and other elements. And in effect, it was sort of a replication of, or a pioneering moment where the anchor of the evening broadcast was not in the studio anchoring the broadcast, but was actually out at the scene of an important story, because I knew this was going to consume the entire broadcast.
And that's on film. That's remarkable.
Yeah. So we pulled that off, and this is a kind of a long-winded story, and I hate to use all this time on this one, but I became so obsessed with why that crashed. I have a commercial pilot's license. I couldn't imagine how a plane could make that kind of a mistake, could get low, could go below decision height and hit the seawall across Boston Harbor. They luckily didn't hit a ship in the harbor in that fog, but I couldn't imagine that. And so I began this digging, and I got all the NTSB stuff. I got the cockpit voice recorder transcript. I got the flight data recorder. I got the tower recordings. I got all the communications. I got the radar track, and I reconstructed the whole flight minute by minute. I reached out to as many families as I could get in touch with who were on board. There were 89 people on the plane. Talked to the families of the pilots. There were 3 in the cockpit. How could 3 seasoned pilots make that kind of a mistake? I talked to their families about what their day was like and why they were doing what they were doing. And I had so much information that I realized it was way too much data, way too much material for television, that wasn't the right medium for this. So I called Boston Magazine and said, I'd like to write an article for you called Anatomy of a Plane Crash. And That's what happened. That was print has a specific advantage over broadcast, and that is when you need lots of detail. You can dig in. To do this on television would have been an epic production. Maybe we could have spent a couple of hours on it, but to write an article, to sift through all this and write an article that's coherent, that has a beginning, a middle, and an end, was the best way to tell that story. And frankly, it's one of the best stories I've ever reported.
Well, and you gave me, Chuck was kind enough to let me read that story. Let me tell you something. If you have a chance, is there some way that they can look that up, do you think?
No, it's not online, but I can email all you.
It is riveting. I mean, he has written this so well. I couldn't stop. First of all, I started reading it on my phone, and I'm going like, I can't stop. I got to know what's happening next. It's written that just phenomenal piece. So somehow,
Thanks, Rick.
somehow we got to get it to these people because it's extraordinary. Let's move on though from that story. And how about telling us about what kind of a welcome you got in New York when you got here?
Oh, that's a good yarn. Yeah. When I left Boston in 1974 and came to New York City, the first thing that I did when I sat down with management was get a lecture on the jurisdictional boundaries of the unions. NBC was thoroughly unionized. All the jobs were carved up into little slices, and everybody had their own jurisdiction. And they warned me of all the things the transgressions I could possibly commit. The worst was with the couriers. In the 1950s, NBC got the bright idea of accelerating the news production business because film had to get from the scene of the story to the film processor back at 30 Rock and be processed before we could even begin to edit. So to make that easier and faster, they decided to hire a motorcycle gang from Queens because motorcycles can zig in and out of traffic and get the film back. By the time I got to NBC, the motorcycle gang had joined the Teamsters, and in their latest negotiation had negotiated for cars. So they were all driving cars now. The advantage was kind of gone, but we had this union there, and these guys, but their jurisdiction was strictly to bring film and equipment to and from locations. No people. But they told me, if you're really up against a deadline, you've got to get back in a hurry, and when you hand your film to the courier to go back, while the crew is breaking down, and you want to save a little time, you have to say, may I please go back to the station with you? And the courier will say, yes. But if you don't ask and you just get in the car, it costs us thousands of dollars for the grievance. So I was a couple of months into the job, and it was 4 o'clock. I was on the air live at 5. And we got notified that there was a new head of the MTA had just been named, and his office was just 3 blocks away from us. And so they asked me if I could just run over there real quick with the camera crew, get a quick interview with him, and we'll get it on the 5 o'clock. 4 o'clock, I rolled out with the crew. We went the 3 blocks. We lugged the equipment up. We set up the lights. I interviewed the subject. By the time I finished, it was probably 4:40. I was on the air now in 20 minutes. And so I took the film magazine, looked like Mickey Mouse ears, and went over to the courier who was standing by, chewing tobacco. And I said, here's the film. May I go back to the station with you? He said, sure, Chuck, come on, let's go. So we went down the elevator. We went out. It was pouring rain out front of the building. We took a left turn, and we went a block. And then we took another left turn and went another half block. And I said, where did you park? He said, it was only a couple of blocks away. I walked. So that was my welcome to New York, Okay, big guy, think you're hot stuff?
That's a great story. But I know we had the same, if you leaned up against a tape recorder at WCBS, you got your hand slapped, literally. Yeah. And so you didn't do that. Anyway, shall we go to your scoop on the Pan Am versus KLM? Can we? Is that
that's we're talking about airplanes.
Yeah.
Just
and you are
quickly.
a pilot, so I mean, you obviously.
Yeah. commercial, I've got a commercial, a rusty,
Do
dusty.
you do
old
any
one.
flying at the moment? No, do you keep current? You know,
No, I'm flying high at the moment. Yes, it's a wonderful organization. No, I haven't flown in a while, a couple of years. Actually, the pandemic kind of put a halt to that.
Yeah.
I took a plane up on my birthday, the last flight, November
Nice.
4th. Ellen will never forgive me. I took her along.
So we're talking about
Anyway.
one of the big air disasters in history, right?
Yeah, I don't know if all of you remember the crash at Tenerife. It was a KLM and Pan Am jets, jumbo jets collided, and 560 some people were killed in the collision on the runway. The worst aviation disaster in history. And by then, I firmly established myself as NBC's aviation reporter. And the big question was, how could this happen? How could two airliners collide on a runway? And if you remember the story, the KLM captain, a very seasoned captain, was getting impatient about taking off. They wanted to get back to home base, and they were worried that the airport would shut down, and they were very impatient, sitting in the runway in fog. And the Pan Am jet that had landed was still was trying to find a taxiway in the fog to get off the runway. And the KLM pilot at one point just got tired of waiting, announced they were taking off, and firewalled the throttles and crashed into the Pan Am jet. So why? Why did that happen? I was contacted by somebody who had access to the cockpit voice recordings and the tower recordings that the NTSB had. The NTSB won't release anything until they're ready to release it, until they've done their investigation, then they'll tell you information. But this was not public yet. And the source, who I regarded as reliable, had these transcripts. And what I learned when I got the transcripts, we did one of these brush passes. I met him under the statue of Atlas on Fifth Avenue. Got the documents.
Across from the cathedral, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. So it was a prayer come true. But in any event, what happened on that was some confusion that occurred when the pilot, the KLM captain, had said, "We are go for takeoff." The tower had gotten on the mic and said, "No, the runway is not yet clear." But at the same time, the Pan Am pilot had hopped on his radio and said, Pan Am, whatever it was, is still on the runway. The two transmissions garbled each other. So the KLM crew did not hear the response from the tower and went ahead. It was clearly KLM's fault, and that was established by that. But before I went on the air with that, I wanted to try to get a second source, as we always do. And I had a really good source at the NTSB, a guy I'd worked with a lot. His name was Brad Dunbar. And I called him up, and we were pals. But I said, "Listen, I've got this, what looks to be an authentic transcript of the cockpit voice recordings. And I'm doing a piece tonight on the air on NBC Nightly News on this. I just want to verify that it's accurate." And he gave me the usual answer: "No, I can't talk to you. We're not releasing that. I can't say anything about that." And I said, "Well, all right, I'm going to put it on the air unless you tell me it's not a good idea." There was a long pause, and he said, he thought about it. He said, "You and your source are on your own." And I took that to mean, don't tattle that I said anything to you. But he didn't stop me from going forward with it. And so that's why NBC broke that story.
How often is it, do you think, that an anchorman breaks a story like that? I mean,
I did it almost every day.
I mean, that's remarkable. You're doing the reporting at the same time you're anchoring the news, which is That's amazing.
Well, that's actually kind of the job description
Yeah.
from my perspective. Anyway, I always like getting away from the anchor desk. Gus Rosendale's here. He's another one. He's a fabulous anchor, but turn him loose in the field and he's lethal. So, but that's I think anybody who's really serious about this, I think would say that getting away from the anchor desk, that's an important job. It's especially important when you have breaking news that you've got to cover live. But I think anybody will tell you that getting out into the field, getting away from the desk, covering a story, focusing on a single story and with intensity is really the icing on the cake of the job. I enjoyed all of that. And I had, for the golden years of television broadcasting before the revenue started to decline because of what's happened with the fracturing of the audience, I had almost unlimited resources to go anywhere on the planet I wanted to go to do a story. NBC would send me.
First class?
Yes, it was in my contract.
That's a smart lawyer you have.
Yeah.
Okay. Do we want to go to the tape here?
Oh,
Go to
yeah.
the
I think
videotape?
I brought a couple of tapes here. I thought this would be kind of fun. This is 1985. Anybody know who that is on the screen? Jerry Nachman. Okay.
Or as we called him Cherry Neck Person later.
Don't roll it just yet. But this is, we did this, I got this idea of doing a little navel gazing and taking the audience into the behind the scenes of television news. So this is a story I did showing sort of a day in the life of a newsroom. And Jerry Nachman was the news director at the time, legendary guy. Mike Callahan was our assignment editor. How many of you remember Mike Callahan?
I worked with both of them.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So you'll see, you may see some characters you enjoy seeing, but this is what it was like back in 1985.
John, that's not your call. You can say what you want to say about how the fire department functioned in this. You can say what you want to say about whether it was routine or not. What you don't get to say is whether it's a news story.
Jerry Nachman's one of the people who do get to say what's a news story. One of a dozen who've assembled on this Friday morning, as they do every weekday, to decide what will appear on the 6 o'clock news.
Now, do you want to give us the piece of paper or not?
Nachman is the news director,
All right,
the boss.
and
And at the moment, he's trying to muscle a document on a fatal fire from a reluctant fire department official.
He really has turned out to be a hump. He says it's not a news story. It's a media event.
One small skirmish in a battle against a much more formidable enemy than a minor fire official, the clock.
All right,
It's nearly 11 a.m. 7 hours beyond this gathering of executives, editors, producers, and writers lies an hour of television time that must be filled with news. Of the hundreds of items that have surfaced overnight in the newsroom, on wire machines, over the telephone, in the morning papers, 21 will make it to the 6 o'clock news.
18-year-old woman beaten and robbed.
Assignment editor Mike Callahan ticks off the most promising candidates.
Lacote Basque has made the dirty list.
Rat droppings.
Some are straightforward and obvious. A New Jersey man has hijacked an airliner with City Council President Carol Bellamy on board. An actor is savagely beaten by a street gang who becomes an instant Bernard Getz fan. Other items trigger debate, like what to do about conflicting claims by officials regarding subway safety.
I think the story to do is you've got Al D'Amato saying he's afraid to ride a subway, his bodyguard's afraid to ride a subway, his daughter wouldn't take a job in New York because she was fondled on the subway.
He says they're too dangerous. What's he going to do about it?
Then you've got the mayor of the city saying the subways are safe.
The debate eats up time. Tension builds. The morning meeting becomes frenetic. Phone calls to reporters in the field mixing with the litany of possible stories.
The guy goes to the restaurant,
Yeah, but I'd also like to do it as a news
kills
story
the
tonight.
father, shoots his
there any way you
estranged
could do it? I
wife,
mean, we
turns the gun on himself.
We don't-
got a phone that Reggie's on 5.
New Jersey correspondent Reggie Harris already trying to cover the hijacking and a flu outbreak.
Reggie.
Balks at doing a story on a murder-suicide.
Is Reggie kissing off this story?
Brett Marcus, the producer of the 6 o'clock news, figures maybe we ought to kiss off some of the crime stories.
Is anything a little lighter? Got a lot of
Got the golden
crime and
Let
ultra-violence
me
in the
keep
show.
going.
15 minutes after the morning meeting, Marcus has decided what stories he'll use and the order they'll appear in the program.
Civillo on subway, I don't care, subway crime, whatever you want to call it.
Mary Civillo is dispatched to cover the subway safety story, one of 17 tape items that must be shot, written, and edited in the next 6.5 hours. Traffic is a constant enemy. Valuable time is lost getting to her first location, Transit Police headquarters in Brooklyn. It takes more time to tape interviews with Chief Meehan and several officers.
I think that the program has to have some balance.
While his reporters toil in the field, Marcus continues to worry about the newscast being top-heavy with crime.
It's current, it's breaking news. I'm just concerned sometimes that we give people sort of a false sense of what happens in our area on a given day.
Crime's on batteries, and the batteries are dead.
For the moment, Mary Civillo's concern is less philosophical. Dead batteries. Correcting the technical problem takes time, and at 20 past 2, time is running out. At Brooklyn subway station, she and her crew run a gauntlet of young men mugging for the camera to interview subway riders about crime.
This is Chuck. You and I are going to have a little conversation. You've got the top of the 6th tonight.
In the newsroom, Marcus's ruminations about crime are shattered by a breaking story. A second verdict in Ariel Sharon's libel suit against Time magazine has just been announced. Less than 3 hours to airtime, and Marcus has to restructure the entire newscast.
Manhole covers explode, train derailments, verdicts, always on Friday afternoons.
And then we go, reaction about the safety on the trains here is mixed.
At 4:30, Mary Civillo was back in the newsroom, showing Marcus the script she's written for a story.
Well, the mayor may have been a regular writer back then, but since then he has dwelled on the Are you look?
Yeah, I'm listening.
But since then he has dwelled on the problems of car size and not subway cars.
Marcus questions the relevance of comments made by a subway rider who calls himself Dr. Lovebeam.
Is he a doctor, or is it just
No, that's what he
street
calls.
urchin?
That's what he calls himself.
Mary defends her use of the interview and wins the argument.
Gang?
3, 2, 1. But Dr. Love was one who defends the politician's right to speak to train safety.
An hour and a half before airtime, she begins the tedious process of editing her day's work into a 2-minute package for the news.
From WNBC TV, this is News 4 New York.
We have more now from Mary Civillo.
The transit bosses won't comment on the senator's statements.
1 minute.
But Dr. Love was one
10
who
out of
defends
this.
the politician's
9,
right to speak
8,
to train safety.
7, 6,
What he's talking about, he
5
probably got a live
seconds.
source,
4.
you know.
Stand by, ready, camera, 4, 2.
Mary Civillo, News 4 Brooklyn.
Take 4 cue.
Well, television news, as you might have gathered, is a pressure cooker. And the pressures don't always encourage excellence. Critics accuse us of everything from shallowness to sensationalism to sometimes outright hype, which brings us to Bernard Goetz. Tomorrow, we'll look at how television handled the Goetz case, including our now infamous exclusive about what the subway gunman ate for lunch one day.
So I was occasionally a smart aleck.
Tell us about the Marla Hanson story. That's a pretty remarkable.
That was another one where where the newspaper gumshoe kind of fantasy I had paid off nicely. You remember the Marla Hanson story, the model who was slashed by her landlord? We had just a copy story on the 6 o'clock news the day that broke. And so when I got off the air at 6, she was in St. Vincent's Hospital. I thought, I'm going to go down there and see if there's any way I can get in to see her and interview her for the 11 o'clock news. And I went down, I told the assignment desk, I'm going to go down there without a crew and just see if I can work something out. Then if I can, I'll call you back and get a crew. So when I got there, boy, the place was ringed off. Nobody was allowed in. Every television station, every network. It was a global story. It was so sensational. But everybody was there outside the hospital trying to get some information on Marla Hanson, the beautiful young woman. She was a classic story of New York, where she was a Texas gal who had dreams of being a model and came to New York, and then she sublet an apartment from a fellow who was an ABC makeup artist, and again, a strange guy who kept barging into the apartment. He had several models living in his illegal sublet, and she wanted out of the apartment and wanted her money back, and that was the genesis of the attack. He had hired a couple of guys to disfigure her. So anyway, I walked into the hospital like I belonged there. Walked past everybody, just walked in the door, went up immediately to the second floor to get off and went to the nurse's station, and I said, I'm here to see Marla Hanson. What room is she in? And the nurse directed me. So I got in, walked into the room, and here was this diminutive young woman alone with stitches all over her face in this hospital bed. Nobody in there with her. And she had watched the 6 o'clock news that night. I walked in, introduced myself, and talked with her a bit, and she was spunky at the time. She was upset because the copy story that we had had a line in there, something about her destroying her career as a model, and she said, I'm not going to let this defeat me. I'm going to still pursue that career. And so I said, well, listen, I think maybe we should say something about that on the 11 o'clock news tonight to correct that. Would you like to say something on camera? And she said, absolutely. So I called the assignment desk and I said, get a crew down here. And I got a hold of the hospital manager and said, I've got a crew coming down. They're going to have to get through the gauntlet here, but I'd like to interview Marla Hanson. She wants to be interviewed. And it was actually the doctor on call, I guess. And he said, well, I have to get permission from her doctor for the interview. I can't just let a crew in. So those days, people wore beepers. We didn't have cell phones. And I tried everything to get a hold of the guy. I beeped him, I called him, nothing was happening. And the clock is ticking, and I've left messages, and I kept going. Now it's 10 o'clock at night. I'm on the air at 11. I'm down in St. Vincent's. Finally, I got a call back, and he apologized. He was out doing his laundry. And he told me that, I explained what was going on and how Marla wanted to go on television and talk about this. And I said, but I need your permission to get the camera crew into the room. And he said, okay, if you mention my name, I'll do it. I'll call. The crew got up there at, I'm guessing, 20 past 10. And I spent maybe 15 minutes just rolling tape and talking to her. And at probably 20 of 11, grabbed the tape, headed down, went out the door, got back to the station at 5 minutes of 11 and threw the tape into playback and said, just cue it up to the first frame. It's all good. And jumped into the anchor chair. And with that, we had the only interview that ever was done with her at that moment in her life on the air. So that the picture of Marla was actually on every newspaper globally at that point from our video.
What a remarkable story that is. Ellen Fleischer is the one that told me about that. I had to ask that.
Yeah, were you down there, Ellen? Were you trying to get into the hospital?
I had the opportunity to meet Marla sometime after that, and she said that meeting Chuck was one of the thrills of her life.
I'm very flattered.
Can we go to a little lighter subject?
Yeah, what would you like?
Okay. The Jerry Nachman story, you want to do that?
Okay, yeah, let's do the Jerry.
This is, you saw Jerry Nachman, but this is a story you haven't heard, I'm guaranteeing you that.
Yeah, Jerry Nachman, you know what a legend he was in town. He was our news director at the time. He had asthma, and he suffered a very life-threatening asthma attack, was hospitalized. And this story revolves around Mike Callahan, the assignment editor. But so he was in the hospital for several days being treated for this asthma attack. And the day he was to be dispatched and sent home that evening, Mike called me up and he said, listen, Chuck, some of us are going to go over and we're going to go visit Jerry in the hospital. They're about to let him out of the hospital. We thought we'd go visit him. We're going to take a camera crew over there and maybe just do a little piece on Jerry in the hospital. Would you like to join us? I said, sure. So I went over, walked into the room. And Jerry was propped up on the pillows, and I walked up and said, Jerry, gosh, you're looking okay. I'm glad you're getting out today. He said, boy, me too. I almost didn't make it. I almost died this morning. He said, they overdosed me on the steroids, and they, my blood pressure shot up and my pulse shot up, and they had to get the crash cart in here, and it was just a bloody mess. I said, oh my gosh, Jerry, is that right? But at this moment, in the door came a woman, dressed nicely in a nice professional suit with a clipboard in her hand, and said, Mr. Nachman, I'm with the hospital here, and before you leave, we'd just like to have a little survey on how you feel you were treated here. And he said, well, I'll tell you how I feel I've been treated. You almost killed me this morning. That's how I've been treated, and I'm just glad to get out of here because, they had the crash cart in here this morning. And she said, oh, well, Mr. Nachman, I'm so sorry to hear that. And she put a little clipboard down, and she reached into her purse and pulled out a tape recorder and pressed play, and it was a bump and grind, and she began to disrobe. Callahan had hired a stripper. And now Jerry is lying in the hospital bed, wheezing for breath, and this stripper is dancing around the bed, getting progressively more nude, down to her pasties and her G-string, when the phone rings. And Jerry picks it up. This is out by now. The camera came in. This is all on camera somewhere. Somebody has the tape. They're recording this. They're gagged. This was the Callahan fun. The phone rang, and he picked it up and said, "Hello? No, sweetheart, I'm not smoking." It was his wife. She must have said, "You sound like you're out of breath. Are you smoking?" It was hysterical. And I just remember one other element. At this point, death walked in the door. Somebody costumed as the Grim Reaper. It was, it was a classic Callahan overreach. But we can't do this kind of stuff anymore, by the way, ladies and gentlemen. This is not permissible, but back then it was just good fun.
Chuck, you have one other, you had a video. This is a short video about COVID and 9/11.
This was at the worst of the pandemic when it was just terrifying. There were a lot of deaths. We were dispatched home. I began thinking about that, comparing it to 9/11, realizing the two great stories, the two biggest stories of my career in New York were 9/11 and COVID pandemic. And there were some similarities and some differences between these two huge, impactful stories. So I had written an email to one of our reporters, Brian Thompson in New Jersey, who'd been covering the nursing homes, and at great peril. That's one thing that we always have to appreciate, is that much of what reporters in the field do is risky. They put their lives on the line to be able to bring truth and veracity to the public. And in this case, there was a virus out there, an invisible enemy floating around that could kill anybody at that time. And but we were covering the story. And so I decided to do a little piece on comparing the two big stories of our lifetimes, COVID and 9/11. And I stepped a little bit out of my lane because my job as a broadcast journalist isn't to tell you how to feel or to tell you how to think. It's to give you the facts and let you decide. I'm not there to buck you up or make you morose. The facts are the facts. I stepped a little bit out of my lane here, and I think it was okay. I'll let you decide that. But this was the piece that mixing, using the best of my medium, which is words and video and sound, this is what resulted.
In the blink of an eye, our world changed that day. Our sense of security shattered, friends and colleagues killed, our economy rocked. But we had the luxury of anger back then, a malevolent enemy to despise. The dangers were obvious, the risks were manageable. Now, the danger is measured in microns, invisible and mindless. The disaster is unfolding slowly. Instead of revealing itself in a single explosive morning, it is 9/11 in slow motion. The toll in lives and economic destruction rising daily. After the attacks of 9/11, we sent our warriors to the other side of the world to avenge the dead and protect the homeland. It was an away game. Now the enemy is here, spreading among us with near impunity. It is a distinctly home game. Our warriors are those indescribably courageous medical professionals putting their lives on the line every hour of every day, tireless in their mission to save us. 9/11 brought us together. We buried our petty differences and linked arms as New Yorkers, as Americans. We gathered to weep as the smoldering pile grudgingly gave up the dead. COVID-19's victims die in isolation, without the final comfort of a loved one's hand, and we are denied the final farewell of a funeral gathering. COVID-19 has driven us apart. Safety is isolation. After 9/11, the suicide bomber was the signature of distant threat. Now we must regard any fellow human being with wary suspicion. a possible vector of suffocating death. Get no closer than 6 feet. In the age of contagion, our humanity has gone digital. But there are common elements between then and now that we must consider above all else. Just as we did back then, with compassion and ingenuity, we're finding ways to help each other. And after 9/11, after the shock and loss, we recovered. We went to work rebuilding our city, our economy, and our lives. We emerged stronger than ever. This pandemic will pass, and as certain as the sunrise, we will do it all again.
You stepped out of your lane and did a beautiful job. I have many other questions to ask you, but I think we're to the point where we're going to try to give some people, a chance to ask questions from the field, if that agrees with everybody at this point. I mean, we've shortened our we had a couple hours more to do, but we decided. He's a great storyteller, isn't he, this guy?
Thank you very much. Well, before we get to the questions, I really do want to tell you how meaningful this is to me, to be here with all of you and to achieve this Lifetime Achievement Award, to accept that. I looked at the list of former awardees, and there are just a handful of broadcasters, probably a dozen or so, who have earned that kind of respect from this legendary organization, beginning with Walter Cronkite in 1969. I will point out that Walter was 53 when he got his Lifetime Achievement Award and still had a dozen years to go as anchor of CBS Evening News. But, better late than never. I'm 82, but
that's why we waited.
Yeah. And then Connie Chung, last year was hers. So it's fancy company that you have put me in, and I am very, very grateful. And thank you for everything you do.
Oh, I'm Vicki Zanich. I'm a former business reporter and also been watching you since you started. My question is about what you just said about stepping out of your lane, because I don't see it. There seems to be increasing pressure on reporters to become stenographers. And I wonder if you thought about that. What is the difference between, observation and stenography? Because a reporter kind of can take sides when the facts lie over here.
Well, the facts speak for themselves. I think if you do a good story, you put the story together. I understand what you're saying, but I think it's not necessary for you to interject your opinion. It's you craft your story, and you get both sides of the story in. You tell it, make a balanced story out of it. But if you do the story well, the story will carry it. I don't think you need to add any editorial content. There are cable channels to tune into if you want to have opinion. You want to have your news soaked in opinion. You can watch Fox News, you can watch CNN, you can watch MS Now, and get people who are not shy about sharing their opinions about what's going on and what they think is right. But I think we have an important job working under the protections of the First Amendment, which is pretty clear in its language. We have a job that's important to the Republic. The citizenry charged with our governing has to have accurate information to make valid decisions when they go to vote and decide who's going to lead them. So I think that's the mission. And I am not comfortable taking a public stand politically. I think that's something that I have to honor the old adage about keeping your opinions on the other side of the newsroom door. When you go to work, you walk into the newsroom, your worldview stays outside. You have to try to do that as much as you can.
I'm Jennifer Kingston. I'm a former New York Times editor and lifelong New Yorker, enormous fan of yours.
Thank
I've been watching you for a long time. It feels very normal to watch you here. And I have a question, which is, why did that plane crash into the seawall at Logan?
Oh, okay. I will tell you what happened. They had some trouble. First of all, the information they got was that they would break out of the overcast at, I think it was 800 feet, and the runway visual range was somewhere close to half a mile. So they were expecting to, as they were making the instrument approach, they were expecting to come down and break out and see the runway. In that approach, the co-pilot was flying. He was not ever firmly established on the glide path, on the ILS, and so he was back and forth because there was discussion in the cockpit from the senior pilot in command, plus another guy who was a 13,000-hour pilot in the jump seat who was requalifying, and none of them were paying much attention to the altimeter as they were struggling with an instrument that appeared to be failing, which was an instrument called the flight director. So at some point, as they're zigging and zagging back and forth, trying to stay on the glide path coming in on their approach to Logan, the captain says, I think we better go to raw data, which means you've got to forget this instrument that tells you what to do on the approach and pick as a pictorial vision of what you do. There are the individual instruments showing your altitude, your airspeed, your heading, and the whether or not you're tracking the glide path. To go to the raw data and forget this computer synthesized thing that's up there that we're supposed to be using. At that point, the plane dipped. It lost altitude, and not one of the pilots noticed it. And they went below decision height, which is 200 feet, and they should have cleared the seawall by 200 feet. They hit it, and all the wreckage vaulted up onto the runway. All the bodies were on the runway. And what's worse is there was confusion with air traffic control because this was flight 723, there was a flight 623 that had landed just before this flight, a Delta 623. So there was some confusion about whether Delta 723 had successfully landed and gotten to the gate. So 2 more planes were cleared to land on that runway. So it was that close to being a 3-plane pileup in the fog. The other 2 pilots hit decision height, couldn't see the runway, and went around. But that's the only reason they didn't land on 4 right. They were cleared to do it. Nobody knew yet there was this crash.
Get him to send you that story he wrote about it. You'll be fascinated.
Dan Foreman.
Dan.
Hi, so I'm an accidental guest here today.
Yeah.
Chuck didn't know I was going to be here. I was brought by your newest member, Sri Srinivasan. He had to leave. But I worked with Chuck for 15 years. And I think I was technically his boss, but I think he was my boss. But we were partners. And I would just like to say a couple of quick things and then ask him a question. The first thing is, it was my job to teach him how to say 50 cent when that story became a story. He said, isn't it 50 cents? I said, no, we got to say 50 cent. And we got him to do it. And Chuck was always flexible that way. But Chuck was also the best writer in the room. We had a whole room full of writers, but he was always the best writer. And I was always thrilled when he said, I'd like to write the lead because I knew it was going to be good. Clearly the best at breaking news and a pleasure to deal with. But he's been talking today mostly about the stories where he was aggressive and he was proactive. But Chuck was also a listener. So one day I bring him a crazy source, a woman from my town, who has a story that I'd like to ask him to just tell briefly about 2 soldiers. And, you know, other anchormen could have blown it off. They wouldn't take it. They were not going to talk to this person. He gets on the phone and talks to her, ended up doing a story about 2 soldiers from 2 sides of World War II that met each other. And the reason it's so impressive, it was a great story, but it's also he listened. He listened to a viewer. He wasn't just deciding as a journalist, as we often do, what's the news. So I don't know if you want to recount that story briefly or not, but I just wanted to acknowledge it.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you very much. And that was one of my favorite stories. It was called Enemies No More. And it was 2 American GIs, one of them Jewish, got a letter from a guy who was a proud soldier of the Third Reich, a guy named Hans Geng. And the letter said, I guess he sent it to James first. Dear James, we don't know each other, but we tried to kill each other at the Battle of the Bulge. I was in the 3rd tank in the column you had the audacity to stop. All my friends from the Battle of the Bulge are now dead. You are the only comrades I have left. And so this odd series of letters had been exchanged. When Dan brought the story to me, they'd begun writing, and Jim, what was the other guy's name? Do you remember the other? No, these two guys were a bazooka team. They were on a little road in the Ardennes forest that that dropped off. We're gonna be here all afternoon with these things. If you just yell if I'm getting too windy here. But anyway, the upshot is the opening thrust when Hitler was moving in through Belgium, through the Ardennes forest to try to attack and break through the Allied lines. They saw the lead tank coming, the column of German tanks coming up this little road where they had this foxhole and had their bazooka. And they managed to, with great difficulty, finally get a rocket off that blew up the first tank, which stopped the column and actually delayed the Battle of the Bulge by a couple of days because the Germans had to back out. There was no way around the tank. It was a steep cliff on one side and a drop off on the other. So it was a little village called St. Vith in Belgium where this happened. So anyway, the guys got their medals for valor when they were in their 70s, when they had gone back for a reunion of their unit back in Belgium, and their commanding officer from the war was with them. Some man walked up and said he was a little kid at the time, and he'd seen these two crazy GIs shoot that German tank, and with the witness, they both got Bronze Stars for bravery, which got publicity, which Hans Geng, who was in the third tank in that column, read and reached out to him. So they decided they would reunite at that location where they had met. And I pre-interviewed Lester, that was his name, Lester Bornstein. And Lester told me he was curious. First he resented the letters when they arrived, then he got curious about this Hans Geng character, and then so I'm keen to meet him. And I said, will you be friends? He said, no, we can never be friends. But I'm just curious about it. To cut to the chase, the scene and we met right at the spot. And these two guys, two American guys, Jim and Lester, were standing with me with a camera. And down this little trail came Hans Geng, this short German with a cane. The hand that held a weapon now held a cane. And he came walking down the road. And they introduced each other. And at first, Lester held back. He didn't go up and shake Hans's hand. Jim embraced him right away. But then, all of a sudden, something broke in Lester, and he came up and embraced Hans Geng. And they were in tears. And they spent a couple of days together there with me, a fly on the wall, talking about their experiences. And they decided they wanted to go to a local cemetery where American soldiers in Belgium were buried. And Hans Geng, I have this video of Hans Geng standing with these two older Americans in front of a grave of one of their comrades who had died, and the three of them saluting. So it was just the best story you could imagine. Should have brought that one too, huh? We could stay here the rest of the day. But anyway.
Yeah, we didn't want to have the handkerchief bill, the Kleenex bill would have been too much. It's really a wonderful story. And it, what it shows is what a heart that you have as a newsman, and the tuning fork that you have inside to feel a story like that. And you're waving again.
We have 3 graduate students of journalism here, and I'd like you to say some words to them. They're about to start their life in journalism.
I hope that if the three of you, second of all, I congratulate you once again, because I think getting this award from this group is pretty special. And you clearly have earned it. So you have interesting careers ahead. Out there in the wild, where you're going to be working, there is what we would have called in the Air Force a target-rich environment. There's a lot of stuff that needs reporting on out there. And we need young, vital, interested, curious, bright people like you out there working in whatever medium you can, whatever medium best tells your stories, to tell those stories. Because really, if you go back and we're in the 250th anniversary of our grand experiment of this country, of having the citizens theoretically control the political direction of the country. And I think we we really need to have a well-informed citizenry that keep this project afloat and buy us another 250 years.
Speaking of legends.
That's your job, guys.
Thank you, thank you. Myron Candell is over here. He's a legend himself.
Chuck, you started this session with a long-form story about the plane crash.
Yes.
You're finishing up with about the Battle of the Bulge. You've made your career short form. You going to do any long-form writing now that you've retired?
Well, it's possible, yeah. I did take a fling at 3 novels. And they are, as I see blank stares, no, they didn't do very well.
Is that in your spare time? What, you wrote 3 novels?
Yeah, I got this. I think we have to probably wrap this up pretty soon because but yes, the first 2 were set in the world of television news, and the third was actually it was fairly successful. Not so much as a novel, but it was the earthquake in New York. It was called Aftershock, the book, and I had covered. There was a kind of a significant earthquake in New York, not much of one at a time, but New York is not earthquake proof, and there have been a terrible earthquake in Eastern Europe that was not that hard, but 30,000 people died because of the unreinforced masonry of the structures. And we have in New York City we had probably half the buildings are unreinforced masonry, all the mid-rise and brownstone types. In an earthquake with horizontal vibrations would collapse. So with that, there was a warning to New York from seismologists and geologists that New York better toughen up its codes because New York is not earthquake proof. There have been serious earthquakes in New York. We're not on a plate boundary, a tectonic plate boundary here, but there is a risk. So for a while, I became the earthquake reporter. I was assigned to cover earthquakes around the globe.
I think I'm getting the look of let's wrap it up. So
yeah, I think so. We've wandered way off into the weeds here.